small group. If you've got questions, interrupt any of us at any time. I haven't asked Sarah, Joe or Bruno for permission, but they live so far away that I'm not worried. So I'd like to introduce myself, Judge Mankalo, one of your new co-hub, now co-leads on the North East and North Cumbria hub. That's right, Andy, isn't it? I've got that right.
Yeah. I think we might be expanded into North Cumbria. I think at the moment it's just North East hub, but that's the plan, isn't it? Expand into North Cumbria, yeah.
So I'm a physiotherapist. I work for the MOD at the minute clinically, but I work full-time at Teesside as a lecturer in research studies and look after a huge mob of MSc students from just about every profession, it seems, dietetics, OT, physio, diagnostic radiography, and that's a different ball game altogether, and soon to be dental therapy, and it's great fun, really. I still teach on the clinical skills module as well for physio, and sometimes I dabble in a bit of OT, which is always interesting for me, probably even more so for them from a what a lunatic physio point of view. But I am still actively involved in research since my PhD, which was all about pain science education. Joe was involved in that study, one of the 5 studies that I did, and I continue to work in pain science education. I've submitted a funding application today myself, so I keep plugging away at my research. It's like a sort of addiction, this research stuff. It's pretty cool. So yeah, thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to hand you over to Andy.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Andy Graham. So my clinical background is occupational therapy. So I worked at James Cook, within South Tees Trust for about 5-6 years, building that kind of clinical base, and it's ended up specialising in amputee rehabilitation, which I'm still kind of very passionate about, and that led on to my starting a PhD at Teesside University. It was actually through an application for the CAHPR small grants scheme. So just to make everyone aware that scheme is open again for this year. I think the deadline's 1st of December. So if you do have any ideas around research, it's a great starting point for kind of dipping your toes in and getting into research. So in my case, that kind of proposal led us directly into a PhD, because it got us in touch with Cormac Ryan, Professor Cormac Ryan at Teesside University. So that was the start of my research journey, and I ended up doing the PhD over the course of 3-4 years, looking into a therapeutic treatment for phantom limb pain. And that research is still going on. So my PhD led to a protocol for a randomized controlled trial, and one of our speakers today, Sarah, we will be talking a bit about, I think presumably we'll be talking about that randomized controlled trial, which she's heavily involved with as well. So that's kind of my clinical background as an occupational therapist. So I'm kind of keen in this CAHPR role to roll out the opportunities for research to a wide range of allied health professionals, so currently also lecturing at Teesside University in occupational therapy and the research methods kind of thing as well. I think that's all I want to say, really. Yeah. So that's back to you, Judge. Yeah.
Thank you, Andy. So in essence, if you've got research queries, anything you want to push on with, anything you want to discuss with just people you've not met before, it can be really helpful, and we're here to support you. I went along to a conference the other day. I had a million questions about co-design. And just looking at the faces of eager researchers was enough to kick off loads of ideas. I came home and wrote up the rest of a proposal that I've actually been quite stuck with. So do use us. We are here. Enough of us. We're going to start with Dr. Joe McVeigh and his route into research. He's thrilled to learn that he doesn't have to share all the research projects he's ever done with you. He wasn't quite sure at one point. So yes, over to you, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jag and Andy. So my name is Joe McVeigh. I'm Head of Physiotherapy in University College Cork, and I'm really delighted to present here today. One of the things I've always been passionate about is supporting junior researchers or novice researchers or people who are trying to get on the research pathway. It can be very challenging. It can be difficult, particularly for those that are working full time. So nobody underestimates the challenges around that. But so if I can do anything to help, I'm more than happy to. So I'm going to present really what I've done, and I don't know. Why should I be presenting? I don't know, but you ask me and you're going to get it. So I'll share this presentation with you if I can. Let me see if I can get this right first. I do that. Is that presenting? Is that sharing?
Yeah.
Yeah,
sharing.
Joe.
Okay, perfect. So about 20 minutes. So I haven't really practiced this. So and the spirit of all good researchers, wing it, So my research journey, I suppose when you think of an established researcher, which I suppose I am, you think of somebody who is striding forward, they have all the supports, they know what they're doing, they know the direction they're going in, and they have all the equipment and everything that's necessary to get them along that journey. When in actual fact, it's probably a little bit more like that. That's certainly how I feel most of the time when I'm doing research or involved in grants or presenting at conferences, whatever. But even maybe it's a wee bit more like that. You're hanging on by your fingernails. You're really not too sure if you can make it, and you're almost always on the verge of collapse and failure. It's maybe not like that all the time, but that's certainly what it feels like sometimes. So, as people that are starting to get on the research journey, you're not on your own. In terms of my journey, in terms of my actual journey, as it were, I trained in Belfast and I qualified at University of Ulster and worked there for many years. And I'll share with you some of the work that I did when I was at Ulster. About six and a half years ago, I got they advertised for a post down here in University College Cork, and they're starting up a new physiotherapy program. And they advertised for a head of discipline. So at that time, Ulster was going through a period of change. They were relocating up to Derry. So I thought, well, if there's going to be some change, I might as well go for a big change. So that's my commute. I don't do it every day, obviously, but that's where I travel from Belfast to Cork. And this is our quad, beautiful campus. We're slightly off campus, but it's a lovely university and it's been a really good move. So that's now. So going back to when it all started, I suppose share some personal details, but I left school when I was about 16. So I going way back then, Belfast was a different place altogether, and there was a lot of disruption and so on and so forth. But anyway, I left school at 16, and then after a few years, I went back as a mature student and did my A levels, and then went on. I was into sport, I was into yoga, and I was into all sorts of things, and movement was a big part of the stuff that I was doing. So I was interested in physio, and I went back and I did physiotherapy. And I graduated in 1992, and I suppose like most physios at that time, we all wanted to be manual therapists, and we all thought that we could do stuff to people and we could fix people, and that was the sort of the context and the ethos of physiotherapy at that time for most people, and I wasn't really an awful lot different. But around that time, there was a few key publications. One of them was, nobody out there will remember this, maybe a few old heads will, but the CSAG report, so the Clinical Standards Advisory Group on Low Back Pain, published this here report on the management of low back pain. And at the same time, or maybe a couple of years later, Gordon Waddell published this book on, the back pain revolution. And that really encapsulated, the biopsychosocial model and the whole notion that hurt doesn't equal harm. And, the extent of pain isn't necessarily related to the damage that you can see on imaging or X-rays and all that stuff. And so that really spoke to me. That really spoke to me at that time. And around that time, as I was developing as a clinician, I was seeing patients with this condition called fibromyalgia, and I was poking and prodding at them and trying to do various Maitland techniques and all that sort of stuff. And patients were, of course, complaining of pain, and they were jumping off the bed, and they were obviously responding in a way that I didn't expect, that nobody really expected. And I was saying, how could you be sore? For goodness sake, I'm hardly touching you. I'm just putting my hands on you and you're jumping about the place like this. And so that sort of, the literature was coming out at that time really spoke to that, central sensitization, allodynia, hyperalgesia. None of that was really in vogue, although it was out there, and it was one of the early researchers in fibromyalgia sort of coined the whole central sensitization model, or he developed it. But so that was what really spoke to me at that time. And I suppose in terms of research, that's where it started for me, way back when, before any of you were born, I'm sure. But anyway, so the first thing I actually published was a book review. I tell a lie, it wasn't the first thing I published. I actually won a poetry competition. I tell a lie. My brother won a poetry competition with a poem that I wrote. So it wasn't the first thing that was published, but it was supposed the first thing that was published under my name. So How to Read a Paper, The Basics of Evidence-Based Practice by Tricia Greenhalgh. And of course, that book has been reissued many times. But, as I was a young junior clinician, really interested in evidence, really interested in research and trying to do something, I said, well, this book was just published, and I said, well, I'll read it. And I remember reading it, and I remember getting into it, and I said, I'll send in a book review to Physiotherapy and see if they published it. And of course they did. And I was absolutely delighted with it. So the point being, you got to get started somewhere. Around the same time, there was a big research trial that was taking place out of York University, I think it was, and it was the BEAM trial, if anybody again remembers that. But it was about back exercise and manipulation, that it compared public health with private sector physiotherapy, with chiropractic, and with exercise and exercise alone, and I think exercise and manipulation and stuff. And there was one of the sites was Belfast, and I was asked to become one of the clinicians that delivered part of the program, and I was more than happy to do that, of course. And that was my first real proper integration into research and the research context. I better watch my time here. God, I've got to charge through this. But I suppose that the lesson and what I want to try.
Minutes, Joe. You've got plenty of time.
Oh, I don't.
Yeah, you just curtail it when it comes to 20. I'll be telling you.
I'll chop through. Okay. So I suppose the first point is to get involved. For anybody who wants to get involved in research, is to make yourself available, get involved, do audits, engage with university colleagues and students, do peer review. And as Andy pointed out there, small amounts of money from this organization can help you get started. So that would be my first point, take-home message. So later on, I got a job as a lecturer practitioner, one of the first lecturer practitioners in the north of Ireland, and that was a split post between Ulster University and the Royal Hospitals Trust in Belfast. And I know they're much more topical now, but back then it was a fairly innovative thing. And I was fortunate enough to get one of those posts. And that allowed me to start my PhD. And I started my PhD looking at fibromyalgia. Ian Chalmers, who was with Archie Cochrane, started the Cochrane Library. And he's not as well known as Archie Cochrane, but Ian Chalmers, brilliant researcher, and he's still some stuff up there on YouTube and so on. You should read everything he's ever published. But he said, should researchers review relevant existing research systematically before embarking on further research? It seems like a ridiculous question to ask, but of course, not most, maybe that's not the case, but many researchers don't systematically review the evidence before they set out to do any research. And there's all sorts of issues with that there, but I think that's an important lesson to tell anybody. This was one of the first reviews I published. It was a narrative review, nothing exciting to tell you the truth, but it was one of, and that isn't even half of the systematic reviews, scoping reviews, meta-analysis, and so on and so forth that I published. And the important point from this slide is that if you want to get started in research, get involved in literature reviewing. Do a systematic review. Now, I've said there's no cost there, but of course there is a cost. It costs time and everything else, but it allows people to develop their expertise, to really delve into a particular area and develop expertise in that area, and to learn about reviewing the literature and bias and critique and all those things that are important in research. And it also allows you to build your team, which is, again, fundamentally important. Research is a team sport, and you've got to work with others. And if you're developing a systematic review or a literature review, this is a good way to reach out to colleagues in the area and say, I'm thinking of doing this here. Can I engage with you? So around this time, I was lucky enough to get a small enough grant, but for me it was large at that time, from the Physiotherapy Research Foundation, which allows me to do further work. Okay, applying for funding, as Andy said earlier, to repeat, apply for funding, get engaged, try and get some money, which even small amounts of money will allow you to do fairly reasonable research. Excuse me. So after I got started, I sort of focused on fibromyalgia, and it was all around exercise and fibromyalgia. And we know patients with fibromyalgia don't particularly like exercise, but that's the area that I was involved in. I did a lot of work on that area, published a lot of stuff. Some colleagues were saying earlier, go to conferences, get some very basic work can be put into a poster and can be accepted at different conferences. And again, it's a very good way to get started and to get on the path. More recently, maybe when I say more recently, maybe about the last 8 years or so, we've been looking at behavioral change interventions and trying to think about behavioral change in fibromyalgia. And I just put this here up. This was only published recently. It was published in the BMJ Open. It's a really small study. There was only 11 participants in it, and there was virtually no money supported the feasibility study. It was a proof of concept, rehabilitation, behavioral change intervention. Again, the point being that even small amounts of money, small pieces of work can lead to half decent publications. And again, this will be something that we'll build on going forward. Another point, if you can, get involved in peer review, get involved with journals. I've been fortunate enough to be involved in editorial work for a long time. And again, it's a great way to get your head around research and get involved in research and to understand the research process and so on. Any journal editor will bite your hand off to try and get you to peer review anything, and they'll support you to do it. A good journal editor will support a novice researcher to get them engaged with peer review. So again, that's another useful thing. In terms of the research journey, at that stage, then I started to support other physiotherapists and others to get PhDs. And we looked at shoulder pain, we looked at breast cancer, and those who had latissimus dorsi flap to reconstruct the breast and the impact of that on shoulder pain. I supervised, one of my colleagues was an OT who did her PhD around splinting, and we did some work around fibromyalgia, nutrition with nutritionist colleagues. And again, the important thing being multidisciplinarity, working with others, stretching yourself outside your field, doing work that is of interest to other fields. We too often we are in our silos, and physios, I don't know if we're particularly bad, but we are bad at getting outside our silos. And it's something, if you can start early, multidisciplinary relationships and working with colleagues, it helps you grow. The other point I was going to make here, a very, very important point, is as much as you can possibly be methodologically rigorous in all the stuff that you do. Again, it doesn't cost an awful lot, to follow the guidelines, to adhere to whatever particular the CONSORT guidelines or whatever particular methodology you're using, to be as rigorous as you possibly can in doing the work. That always pays benefits down the line, and you learn a lot by doing that as well. What else? Building multidisciplinary teamworks, again goes back to this notion that research is a team sport. Reaching out to colleagues in other universities, reaching out to colleagues in other countries, and for the most part, good researchers are very generous with their time and are very supportive. We all want to collaborate and we all want to work with others, so they're very supportive of novice researchers that are reaching out to others. So that's the point from that slide, I suppose. So this brings us to more recent times. So about 6 years ago, I moved to UCC, and one of the important things in a brand new program with 0 students, in terms of developing the program and developing the course and so on, was to build research capacity. So that was the focus of my research, going back 5 years or so. And it was to build up PhDs and to get people involved and get people engaged and to get people doing research. So I was fortunate enough to get, many of the staff that started didn't have PhDs, so they're all doing PhDs. And I think I've probably got about 10 PhD students at the moment, which is far too many. But again, it's just part of my research journey. So then I was down here about 6 years ago, and then in 2020, coronavirus and the epidemic disrupted everything, and the onset of that, of course, was devastating for us all. But when we started to look at coronavirus and look at long COVID, we could see that while it has hundreds of different symptoms and patients that present with the problem, fatigue, post-exercise malaise, brain fog, breathlessness, and pain are some of the key features of long COVID. And again, that's not too far away from the ballpark that I had always been working in. So I started to develop a little bit of an interest in long COVID. And around that time, some colleagues who were working in the VR for Rehab network, which was a European-wide network of researchers who were looking at virtual reality interventions for rehabilitation, stroke, cerebral palsy, chronic pain, and so on. They were working in that area, and some colleagues reached out, and when they were starting to look at long COVID, they reached out to me. They were fortunate enough to get a large grant. We were fortunate enough to get a large grant looking at developing VR solutions for long COVID, and then that took me in that direction for a little while, and we've been working in that. And I think I still have a few minutes. I'll be able to share a few slides from our.
You've got almost 4 minutes still, Jim.
4 minutes, wow! So Andy has been working on this with us as well, so he will be familiar with some of this stuff. These are really jumpy. So we're looking at VR solutions in long COVID, and the aspect of long COVID that we're looking at is pacing. So we developed these VR tools to teach people how to pace. And there's a few introductory sort of tutorials. One of them is brushing your teeth, and it allows people just to get used to the VR. And then washing dishes. And this seems maybe a little bit cartoonesque, but when you're immersed in it, it is really good, he said, without any bias whatsoever. And you can see that in the game, you can see there's a little watch with a battery motif on it, and there's a battery in the scene somewhere. Again, it's given the people that are using this have to learn to conserve their energy, and that battery motif drops down as they use more energy. It's a big file here, so I'm not sure it's going to work for me. So now it's frozen. Let's try and go on the next one. Yes, so another part of the game is this walking. So you're trying to teach patients how to pace their activities. And part of that is that they teach the avatar in the game how to pace their activities, hoping that transfers into real life for them. So I'll go on to the next part, see if it'll go on. And again, it's a cartoon type character. And at the start of the VR pacing game, you get information about long COVID, post-exercise malaise, fatigue, all that sort of stuff. Again, there's an educational component to the VR experience. They do the walking game. You can see here the battery motif and the watch that shows how the energy is diminishing. Users can take a break, and the number of breaks that they take during the game is recorded, and so on. And again, that's them trying to direct the avatar to the bench to go so far before they take a break. Other activities, cooking, so they have to cook a meal in the game, and this is quite fun. You know, I'm not really a technologist in any shape or form. I don't play games or anything like that, but trying to use the handsets and trying to, navigate through the game, it is quite fun and it's engaging. But at the same time, the point of the game is to teach people how to pace their activities And again, these batteries and the wee watch and so on is all part of that. On to the next one, conscious of time. And there's a laundry task as well, where the avatar has to collect laundry and do the laundry, and you can see the battery and so on and so forth. I'll just skip on. And at the end of the game, there's a review that tells you about baseline, pacing activity, and so on and so forth. Prioritizing, planning, and pacing their activities. Move on. The most recent grant we got, and was just launched last week, was it's about scaling up for rehabilitation, and it's about using developing a virtual rehabilitation clinic and to get XR tools, VR tools, and so on into the clinic and into the community. We know that people can't access rehabilitation, and this is one way to give access, but there's also unique things that you can do in the virtual space that you can't do in the real space. So we got a big pile of money to do this here, and we've only just started it. I know we're last 30 seconds. Oh, there we go. So that is, I suppose, my research journey. It's been great. Worked with absolutely fabulous people. Worked with people from all over the world, different universities. The one thing that strikes me is how generous people are with their time, and how giving they are of their time, and how smart people are, which is always depressing. But anyway, if I was to give one piece of advice to developing researchers, I would say, most importantly, be true to your values. There are some people in work in academia that are perhaps you wouldn't want them to be your best friends. I'll leave it at that. But you be true to your values as a clinician, as a physiotherapist. Be generous and enjoy yourself, and don't sweat the small stuff. We get too tied up in silly nonsense stuff, which isn't really that important. But I suppose that's me. I think I'm finished.
That's great. Thank you.
I rushed it a wee bit there. Sorry.
That's brilliant. I'd just like to take up a couple of points from Joe there. I have come across the most astounding levels of kindness in research. Don't be afraid to ask. Joe actually has been part of my kind person journey, and it's interesting. It just builds up like a snowball. This is undoubtedly too warm and fluffy for a Monday evening, but absolutely be kind. Also, my journey too started with peer review. I'm only an early postdoc, but the thing to remember with peer review when you offer yourself up is, does it make sense to you? I possibly ask a bit more of papers that I read now in peer review, but it's sense making is really important, and all of you can readily do that. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add, just to echo Joe's messages there. Sarah, remind me, is it you next? I've forgotten. Yes, perfect. So next we have Sarah Otway, whom I've met many times on campus. She has the most interesting journey through to research that I'm semi-aware of. So I'm really looking forward to this. And Sarah, would you like a reminder at 5 minutes, 1 minute, no reminders, your choice?
Yeah, trying to follow Joe is obviously going to be an absolute nightmare, but because I'm very early stage, I don't think I'm going to end up doing 20 minutes anyway. I might witter on. I'm good at that. So yeah, just fire away. If I'm going on far too long, just let me know.
Thank you, Sarah.
I'll be hard pushed for 10 minutes, but we'll see. Okay. Let me see if I can share the right. Can you see that, guys?
Yes, thank you.
Right, let me just get my screen out of the way. Okay, so my name's Sarah Otway. I'm currently, my job title is the Phantom Relief Clinical Trial Manager at Teesside University. Let's go on to the next one. So I am at the very start of my research journey. Nearly 6 years ago, I graduated from Teesside as a mature student. Previous to that, I did a degree in performing arts when I was much younger. I was a professional dancer for some years, and then, as all good actors and actresses do when they get a bit too old for the game, I ended up in hospitality management for many years. And Much the same as Joe, it piqued a memory really. Because I'd been a dancer for years, I was obviously interested in movement and bodies, and I guess remained a bit of a show off and wanted to find a way of helping people to maintain their bodies for longer, stay fit and well and active. And we considered going back to university, which was hugely scary. I'm quite profoundly dyslexic, so if you pick up on any spelling mistakes, I make no apologies for them. This isn't going back to study wasn't a natural process for me. It was hard, but I forced myself. I got out of my comfort zone, went back, loved it. When I graduated, while I was looking for my first post, something called KTP associate job post came up. I had no idea what a KTP associate was. I don't think anybody does out there, despite KTP being in circulation since I think 1974. It's generally, they were very engineering based originally, but they've changed immensely since then. So the KTP was based at Teesside University, slightly different to a traditional KTP, where the associate is based with the industry partner. This was a slightly different KTP. We had mentioned earlier from Andy, Professor Cormac Ryan here at Teesside University had been working very hard to try and find ways to trial and test a novel device for the treatment of phantom limb pain, and reached out to SME down in Nottingham called MediDirect Limited, and they got on well. Jason Timms, who is the CEO of now, they are now transferred into a company called 2PD Limited. He's an entrepreneur, likes to take risks, which is what we love. And so he put his backing into the KTP, and my job was as the associate in this setup. So the idea of the KTP was, as you can see on there, to develop and validate a software-led sensory discrimination device to treat phantom limb pain, and fingers crossed also for the rehabilitation of patients following a stroke. We've had lots and ups and downs. It was a 3-year project to start with. Smack back in the middle of it, we had COVID, which completely changed the trajectory of the project. We were going to run a very northeast-centric, small-ish clinical trial. The beast has grown. We are now completely decentralized the trial, and so we had to go back to the drawing board as far as the research, the clinical trial protocol was concerned, straight back to the drawing board, rewrite it as a decentralized trial, find the software that would mean that we could do this, and delay after delay. The KTP, the Innovate UK were really helpful, supported a break in the KTP, allowed us to sort of regroup and get back to it. MediDirect, now 2PD, funded me to carry on in my post for the interrupt, and then we carried on, finished the KTP in October 2022. Since then, because of the delays of COVID, we didn't get started with the clinical trial. With the best will in the world, we tried, we haven't. So 2PD have continued to fund me in post to carry on with the project. Last year, off the back of the KTP, the university put me in touch with the Royal Commission for the Exhibition of 1851, who provide industry fellowships, industrial fellowships. These are very much like a KTP, but they are quite a bit more generous and also pay for you to do your PhD. So that's where I'm at now. I'll tell you a little bit more about KTPs and what they are, because if you're not familiar with them, you'll wonder what I'm talking about. It's a knowledge transfer partnership. The point of them is to help a business gain knowledge in an area where they are lacking in order for them to build their business portfolio, whether it be through innovation, ways to grow their business in different ways. So it's a three-way partnership between the KTP associate, like a project manager, the industry partner, and a university. They currently have 800 projects on the go. There is a £33 million annual budget. It's going up to 45 million this year. And they have lots and lots of deadlines, so it's pretty much constant application through there. So to apply, you apply through a business partner. So this used to be very much based around large and SMEs, small to medium sized enterprises. It has grown and grown and grown. It's now open to charities and not-for-profit, and also some public sector organisations. So people within the NHS can now apply, but only for the management KTPs, which is for 2-year projects. So this is not an exhaustive list of project types. They will consider anything as long as it's innovation. So there are criteria, but they're very broad. There's a lot of information on their website that really helps you with filling in any application. I think the most important thing is having a really nice, if you can, an already established relationship between business and university, which is much easier said than done, I appreciate. So these are basically the key criteria that they are looking for in the application, and these are how you fill it in. So as long as you've got a plan and the likely impacts and benefits in your mind, you can't really go wrong, she says. So what is a KTP associate? So it's a full-time project manager. It's based within the business, and it's a conduit between the business and academic partners. As I say, ours was slightly different. Again, they are incredibly flexible and incredibly supportive of new ways of working this partnership. So don't be afraid to put it to them, speak to the advisors. They will find a way of it fitting their brief. They really want to support this kind of project. The only real I get caveat to that is I've lost my train of thought. So the projects are normally between 12 months and 3 years, and the person needs to be suitably qualified to support the business realise the project's objectives. So this is where my past life came into good use, because I'd worked in management, project management previously, and then obviously with my very recent, very current undergraduate course, ticked the clinical box as well. I appreciate I did not have the experience that some people have before they go into research as a clinician. There is also available, as I mentioned before, the MKTPs, which is a management KTP. That's more looking at things like service improvements, culture change, and streamlining processes within organizations. And an AKT, which is an accelerated knowledge transfer, which means that you don't need an associate. They're very small 4-month projects. For example, a proof of concept idea, and that with the idea of it perhaps moving on to either a standard or a management KTP in the future. So ours was very broad and changed enormously during the COVID lockdowns. Everything went online. Communication sort of slowed down, and supply issues meant that trying to develop our very novel new device was virtually impossible. We were trying to deal with suppliers over in China. That stopped. So everything ground to a halt, but we used it to really expand the trial in ways that we hope will be really successful for the final outcomes. So these were my objectives as an associate, really. Overall, it's sort of a snapshot of the big picture over the 4 years. Doesn't look too much when I dial it down to 8 points, but trust me, it was hard graft. But fascinating and really interesting to really have the time, have the support, have the mentorship and the coaching to really embrace the business side of the process as well. So really looking at commercialization, having a grasp of what it is that commercial partners are looking for, which never really, I think, if we're completely honest, rubs along with academia, which works at a much slower pace. Bringing new innovations to fruition is not always easy. So these KTPs are brilliant because you've got somebody smack bang in the middle who's liaising between the two parties, encouraging the work to happen in a much newer way than most academic work happens, through the innovations that the commercial side can bring, and much the same. It works both ways. The commercial partner probably doesn't have any knowledge of what is required from a research perspective in order to really give a robust evidence base to any innovation that they want to get out there, and is completely necessary if you want to roll out your device in a commercial setting, at least within the NHS. So the benefits of being a KTP associate: you get more industry experience, and obviously a high level of support from the university. You get a nice fat personal and professional development budget, and it's superb. And I sound like I work for them, but it was superb mentoring and coaching from the KTP advisors. Management training they pay for, and you are supported to go on sort of management training courses. You are able to, I wasn't as part of mine, go on and do, well, I did do other professional qualifications, but not a high degree. Some KTPs are aimed at people already with PhDs. Some aren't and allow you to do it alongside the KTP. But there is time set aside for you to take part in, taking more qualifications. The salary is competitive. To be outright there, as a newly qualified physio, the salary was blown out of the water, because it's a commercially viable. You know, I was looking, I think back then it was, if I can be so crude as to say my starting salary was 33,000 rather than 23,000, it would have been in the NHS. So I think as a mature person going into their first job, that was another no-brainer for me. So my next step is to do, I've been awarded a fellowship with the Royal Commission for the 1851 committee. Again, much like the KTPs, no one's heard of them either. But again, it's to carry on the work that we're doing on this project. And as you can see, that's the benefits there. And I hope to start in October, all being well. And yeah, so I can delve much deeper into this. It's you know, take my commercial head back off and try and get back into research, which is fantastic. So yeah, that's me. That's all.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I am as much in awe of your route as I always have been from just meeting you fleetingly in corridors. I think for me, it's still quite daunting. Bruno, thank you for that link. I had a quick look. That looks fascinating. This is quite an alien environment, I think, for a lot of clinicians. But good for you for taking the opportunities, and we wish you well with your PhD. I look forward to hearing about it next CAHPR meeting. Okay, does anyone have any questions for Sarah at this point? No? Okay, Bruno, moving on to you. Thank you very much for coming to talk with us today. I've never met you, so again, I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Brilliant. Okay, so hope you can see my slides. Yeah. Okay, so I'm probably in the middle in between Joe and Sarah. So I've done my PhD, and I'm sort of in the postdoc, a bit getting more advanced in my career. I'm Bruno. I'm research fellow at Manchester Metropolitan University. My area for research is musculoskeletal rehabilitation. I'm a physiotherapist by background. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But I'm also looking at the implementation research and how we can actually bring research more quickly to clinical practice, because there is still this gap that we see that takes long time from when we get research done, and we still have the model of publishing, thinking that we can leave that on a shelf and the clinician will go read it and it will just apply to their patients. So I think we need to be much more proactive in that way, and so we can make things move quicker and be more effective with that. And another aspect of my research is also looking at patient-reported outcome measures in terms of how inclusive they are. So looking how they have been developed and whether we can have adaptations and make changes to these patient-reported outcome measures so we can have more diversity in research. Okay, so I'm from Brazil, so I'm not from the UK, and I come from a city called Londrina, which is sort of a translation for Little London. This Londrina is on the top of south of Brazil, so it's in the Paraná states. So if you know, or if you are familiar a little bit with the map of Brazil, so you can see around here is São Paulo. So one of the most famous city in Brazil, the most populous one. And if you go to the right, closer to the coast, is Rio de Janeiro. And if you go up, here is Brasilia, which is the capital of Brazil. So if you were to do this road trip here, you'd probably go you'll be looking at 3,000 kilometers. So it's a big country. And unfortunately, I'm far from the coast and the beautiful beaches that we have, but Londrina is a nice place. And the Paraná states, if you go to close to the border, so here we have Paraguay and Argentina, and we have the Iguazu Falls, which is one of the 7 wonders of nature. So it's worth a visit if you have the opportunity. So as I said, I'm from Londrina, and that's where I did my bachelor's degree, Universidade Estadual de Londrina. And then when I finished, I did my master's, and following that, I did my PhD, which we'll talk a bit more in a minute as well. But my route into research, it actually started when I was an undergrad. And I got involved when I was in the 2nd year of my degree with a research group. So we have a different structure there. So usually you have someone who be the head researcher. So we had Professor Jefferson, and he had he still has a research group there, which then involve a lot of PhD students, master students, and some undergrads. They have the opportunity to be part of the group as well. So here on the first picture on the left, for example, and this research group is heavily involved with biomechanics. And so we have there in the first picture, isokinetics machine, and we had a lot of experience with different athletes. So this athlete here, his name is Jadel Gregorio. I don't know if you know about him, but he's a triple jumper, and he has the 7th best jump in the history. And as an undergrad, I had the opportunity to help him with his training. He was recovering from some knee surgery, and I could help with his training. And I was very excited about it. But in Brazil, we have some differences as well. So you don't learn just about research. You get to learn a bit about DIY as well. So Jefferson, he got a grant to buy some computers and refurbish the lab, because he got some 3D cameras so we could do some movement analysis. But he got the money just to buy the equipment, so we didn't have the money to actually do the refurbishing of the room. So we did it. So we did all decoration, and you get to learn a lot of things. And it was really interesting because at the time, so it wasn't just the isokinetics machine. We use electromyography to test the muscle activity. And at the time, one of the projects, it was looking at how people who had a rotator cuff tear, how they were recovering from surgery. And then we're using electromyography muscle activity to see if there was a difference between people who did not have a surgery and those who had the surgery. But at the time, it was okay. So of course you have a difference there, because these people, they have had shoulder pain for a long time. Their muscles have been working differently. They had surgery, so they had a period of rest. Some had physiotherapies, others not. So for me, the research question wasn't that developed, and I was thinking, okay, how I could potentially do this better. And I always had that in my mind. So a few years gone by, and by getting involved with this research group, I started getting some publication. And as Joe mentioned, one of the best ways that I see that you can get started with research is by doing some systematic reviews. And the systematic reviews also brought me the curiosity of understanding more about what I was reading in terms, okay, does it make sense in terms of clinical practice? So I started looking at, okay, let's look at the effect estimates. What does that mean? Look at the confidence intervals. What does that mean? There is a lot of uncertainty here. And then you start thinking, okay, so what's a grade? if I have to do great, how I can do it, what does that mean in clinical practice as well. And by starting doing my bachelor's degree, I could go, let's say, the step-by-step of doing it and understanding this method and how to do research. And I was fascinated about that. And I was almost sure that I wanted to continue in research by the time I was finishing my degree. So when I finished, in my first paper as a lead author was the top on the left, and we were using, again, biomechanics 3D movements to look at some patients who were having their rehab in the university hospital. Those patients had stroke and were looking at their gait and doing some gait analysis. It was great. And when I started doing my masters, again, you learn a lot of different skills. And this was a swimming pool that was being built at that time. And well, again, we had the money to buy the equipment, but we had to install it. So the first picture on the left is us putting some cement to stick the force plate on the bottom of the swimming pool. And then, yeah, that was done. And then no one told us that they would open the tap on that day. So they did. So they filled the swimming pool and said, well, okay, we need to install this force plate now. So we had to use our diving skills. So this is us trying to install the force plate there. We had a guy from the company who actually came to help us as well, because yeah, it was a challenge, but it was a good lesson to learn. And in the end, it was working fine, and we could use for research purpose as well. So we could analyze, for example, do a gait analysis with people who had ankle instability, knee problems in the swimming pool, see if there were some differences between different physiotherapy packages. And I think the final moment that I said, okay, I really want to be a researcher, was when I attended my first international conference. And I was really lucky, and I had to have the opportunity to go to the World Physiotherapy Conference in 2011 in Amsterdam. And when I went there, I could see so many researches, so many interesting projects going on, and I also had the opportunity to visit Professor Ariane Verhagen. So you can see here on the top middle picture, so she's here with the blue top. And for those who don't know Ariane, so her work, her PhD work was on, and if you are familiar with the PEDRO database, is a common database used by physiotherapists. So her PhD was looking at how to develop the PEDRO scale, which you use to assess the quality of the risk of bias of randomized controlled trials. And then I had the opportunity to come the first time to the UK to visit Professor Jim Richards, who then became my PhD supervisor. And we had the opportunity, again, go to conference and present our work. The top photo on the left is me doing my first conference presentation that we organized about research and clinical practice, how to use research for patients with low back pain. And I had to talk about electrotherapy, and you know that electrotherapy is not the best treatment for low back pain, but it was an interesting presentation. And then the poster that we presented at the World Physiotherapy Conference down there. So again, had a lot of opportunities to work on different projects, get a few publications. My master's dissertation was looking at isokinetic tests of football players and look at their muscles, how they were working, the difference between professionals and those who were under 17, and look if there were some sort of outcomes, variables that we could spot that would say, okay, these under 17s, they were doing well, they probably do well when they become a professional. but also looking at different patient reported outcome measures, and starting with some small-scale randomized control trials. So the first one on Pilates, looking at patients with low back pain. So when I finished my master's, so I got a small grant that was covering my salary from our master, so I could do it full time. So I applied for a fellowship, and I got this fellowship, who then gave me the opportunity to come to the UK and do my PhD full time as well. So there's me, last picture before getting onto the plane, 2014. So it's been almost 10 years that I've been here in the UK. Didn't know what to expect, to be honest. A lot to learn, a lot of different things, but I was so excited, you know, as you can imagine, as a very young person, and look at a different world of opportunities. And then I came to the UK to do my PhD on that question that I had when I was a bachelor student, and look at those patients with rotator cuff tears and who had surgery. So my PhD was looking at different approaches to rehabilitation after rotator cuff repair. And because I was involved so much in biomechanics at the time, I thought, okay, so let's have a look on biomechanics, but let's start looking at more clinical outcomes. So in terms of patient-reported outcome measures, questionnaires. So there is me in one of the first sessions with Jim, was my supervisor, looking at the 3D cameras, how I could use them. I had no idea how to use them. And the inertial sensors as well, which I end up using to take to the hospital in Wrightington and collect data from patients there. So I would collect data before surgery and then 3-6 months and see how they were progressing. And it's been such a journey, and I'm glad that I took this route of going and continue doing research and doing a master's, doing a PhD. As Joe said, people are very generous with their time, and getting involved with peer review is great. And sometimes you might feel a bit overwhelming if you are starting your research career, because you might think, okay, but I know nothing about this method, or I've never read a paper looking at this particular problem. But often when I started doing it, if I had some questions, I would come and talk to a more senior researcher, someone with more experience, and hear about what they had to say about it. So I don't know about this particular method. I don't know the statistics, what they have done here. Is that correct? What do you think about it? And by doing that, you start discussing about research, and you learn so much. And then I think now I'm the position that I can give back, and I'm that person that I'm open, you know, to people come to me and say, okay, let's talk about research. Let's discuss this paper. What are your questions? How this can inform the work that you do? What do you do differently, for example? So yeah, that's me after my Viva. So I was happy that I passed, and then my graduation. So life goes on, and the little one came about that time. So he's 5 now. And I think what was interesting as well with my PhD was that one of the most important papers that I have came from a disagreement with my supervisor. So I published a systematic review that is on the top left here. And at the time I was discussing with Jim and saying, look, Jim, I'm proposing a randomized control trial. I need to look what has been published so far and make, let's say, official what it's out there, so we can have like an anchor and see what has been done, what needs to be done differently if they have done well. And then I remember this so vividly, and Jim saying, well, are you sure? I think that systematic review takes so much time, and I'm not so sure the output will you know, have such an impact on your PhD. And I said, yeah, I'm sure. I think we need that, and I'll go and do it. And I did it, and I don't regret that. And having that conversation, very constructive, of course. And that was published in a top journal. And that paper after gave my first job after my PhD. And I'll talk about that. But then I published the main trial. I had a few more data. Look to explore a bit more of that data and got it published as well. And actually, this last paper took a while and was published this year. So as I said, this systematic review, it gave me this job. So after I finished my PhD, I got a position at University of Warwick as a research fellow. And it was to work in the PROSPER trial, which was prevention of shoulder problems. So this was a trial looking at different physiotherapy approach for women who had breast cancer and had received treatment for breast cancer. So there's a good proportion of these patients who come and develop shoulder problems. And when I got the invite for the job interview, so Julie Bruce, who led Prosper and was there to interview me, she had the systematic review printed, and she was an editor for Cochrane. She's an editor for Cochrane. He said, well, look at your systematic review here. So do you want to talk about it? And then we started discussion about systematic reviews, and she was saying, well, I think you did well. And so I like your systematic review. There are other systematic reviews we are working here. So, and she offered me the job. And I was really happy that I got the position. And I was really happy to be involved in a clinical trials unit, which, I learned so much about the multi-center randomized controlled trial, working in the NHS, recruiting for multiple sites. The sample size was almost 400 patients. And in the end, we could show that this physiotherapy approach, patients were doing better. It was clinically effective, cost effective, but more importantly, looking at the qualitative research, patients, they felt empowered by the rehabilitation. That was the only aspect of their cancer treatment that they had some control of. So they could do the exercise and they would feel better about it. I mean, they would feel better about their shoulder movements.
As Joe has just illustrated beautifully for us as his lights go off again.
Yeah, great shoulder mobility there, Joe. So now
Bruno.
I'm part of the Physiotherapy Research Society. So there, Joe is part of as well. We work together in the Physiotherapy Research Society. And for those, David has presented in this year. And it's a great conference. It's very friendly. And for those who are in the beginning of their career, we had a lot of early career researchers presenting. It was around implementation and impact. So this is a yearly event. So next, 2024, April 2024, we will be in Bournemouth. And I'm glad that I'm involved in this sort of society because it helps. I can see how we can help physiotherapy, so the profession to grow in terms of research. So again, if you have the opportunity to get involved in these sort of societies, that's a good, from my perspective, it's a good thing. You learn a lot as well. And especially when you offer to be the host and you're hosting and leading the conference, you see how much work is needed, how much you need to organize, but it's worth it. It's really good. And looking at the future, I'm now involved in a bigger scale, let's say, of my PhD. So this is led by Professor Chris Littlewood from Edge Hill University. It's called the Racer 2 Trial, so rehabilitation after rotator cuff repair. We started recruiting in June this year, and we'll be recruiting for about 2 years, so over 600 patients. And again, looking at
If I could ask you to start to wrap up for us, that
Yeah,
would be fab, please.
that's
Thank you.
the last one, sorry. So looking at different approaches to rehabilitation, one is patient-directed rehabilitation. They can remove the sling and start moving as soon as they feel able. And the other, they have to use a sling for 4 weeks, and we'll be looking at 12 weeks, which one is doing better, but also looking at longer follow-up as well. So that's me. Sorry that I went over a little bit, and feel free to contact me. So you got my email and Twitter there. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Bruno. And you're a perfect example of a real, I think something that's key to success in research is just having a can-do attitude and saying, yeah, what is there to do? Want me to paint your swimming pool? I can do that. Research. So yeah, thank you very much. We haven't many attendees today. So Tom, over to you. No pressure. You didn't know you were doing this today, but seriously, if you've got any questions, Andy and I are going to stay on. If you want to talk about any ideas you've got, or if you need any support. Joe, Sarah and Bruno, thank you so very much. Oh, before I forget, Bruno, April 2024, what's happening in Bournemouth? What's the focus of the PRS conference?
Yes, I think we're about to know what's the main theme, but any research around physiotherapy is welcome. So it's a very broad conference. So if you have any work you'd like to present, just feel free and have a look on when we talk about the dates for submitting our abstract. But yeah, every aspect of physiotherapy research is welcome.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks again. So David and Tom, we'll stay on if you'd like to ask us any questions, or indeed if you'd like to ask Joe, Sarah or Bruno anything.
Thanks very much. That was really fantastic. I've learned so much just in the last hour and a bit. So my background, I'm a physio and I've just been clinical for about 14 years, but I'm aware it's a long career and I'm really interested in getting into research, obviously starting a little bit late in my career, but it's just, I'm just looking at the different routes of how to get into it. So it's been so useful today. I mean, with Sarah's talk, I had no idea about KTPs even existed, and there's some really valuable tips and things like that from all of you, really. So I've got loads of ideas kind of moving forwards, and yeah, it has been really, really useful. I suppose I've had a few questions I've kind of made notes of during the talks, but I guess one firstly for Joe, if you don't mind. You mentioned some journal editors were happy to be approached to peer review articles, and is that something that just anybody can do, or do you have to have a sort of a certain level of qualification or research backing you up already?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And very often when we're mentoring, PhD students or anybody in research, you would often say to them, here's somebody's asked me to peer review this, you do it and I'll help you. So you would allow or encourage the novice researcher to do the peer review with there's guidelines obviously you can follow. Then they do that, and then you input and you support and you help them develop their peer review skills. You wouldn't just there are skills to it. You have to be able to feed back to an author the critique of their paper that will allow them to develop their paper. It has to be meaningful and not just any old rubbish. But so there is a skill set that you have to have, but you learn that as you're doing it. You can learn, and usually a good editor or a good section editor will mentor new reviewers coming in. So if you plus you say I've only got 14 years clinical experience, that's what it's all about. That's it. I can't remember how many years I had before I got into it, but coming at a peer review with that clinical perspective is really, really important. I was just earlier there, I was looking at a review of a paper, and one person that's reviewed it is more of a researcher, and the other person is coming at it from a clinical perspective, and they're both very different reviews, both very, very valuable. And then I'll sort of try and combine those together and give the authors some sort of decent feedback. So coming at it from a clinical perspective in your peer review is really, really important as well. you can only say so much about sample sizes and effect sizes and all the rest of it. But if somebody coming in and says, hold on a second, that's never going to work. Patients are never going to do that. That's nonsense. You know, that's really valuable from, you know, the clinical perspective. So send me an email. I'll have your review before the week's out. You know. But no, it's a really good way to get into it. You know.
That's yeah. Thanks very much. That's really useful. May well send you an email.
Please do.
Yeah. And Sarah, I hope you don't mind if I ask you a question. Just really interesting. You mentioned the industrial fellowship, where it was 50% that they could fund you, and is that kind of 50% they would fund you to do research, and then your other 50% you could continue with like clinical work or something like that?
So specific for me, and I don't, so you have to be employed by, so if you were employed by the NHS, for example, they basically the industrial fellowship pays your PhD fees, and then 50% of your salary in order for you to have that time protected. So, I mean, for me, it's slightly different because of carrying on the KTP setup. But yes, yeah, it sort of has the expectation that buys out your time.
Okay. So I think that sounds similar to I've looked at the Health Education England, do that clinical academic program where it's maybe a similar sounding type thing. Yeah.
That's a really good program. So I'm a wee bit out of the UK at the moment, but you know, I've looked at it and seen it. But that's a really good opportunity for anybody like yourself who's, you know, a clinician who wants to get involved in research, and working with a university partner to try and build up an application would be the way to go. You know.
Yeah, and on the back of that, there's specific NIHR fellowships for AHPs.
Yeah.
So definitely worth looking into, Tom. Like, so you get that split between, you know, continuing doing the clinical work, but doing a proper research program as well.
Yeah, it really appeals to me doing that. I've heard that they're quite competitive to try and get on to. So, but yeah, that would kind of be my sort of dream scenario to land something like that. But yeah, I guess trying to get I'm open to as many routes really as possible. But yeah, no, thanks so much, everyone. That's been really, really useful today.
David, are you on a PCAF or an ACAF? Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just going to suggest to Tom that, so I did an NIHR internship, and then I jumped onto a pre-doc award, and essentially they give you money and time, which clinical physios don't have either of them. So that's what these awards are brilliant for. And when I say money, I mean around education, training, and also to attend conferences, etc. So absolutely the best thing I've done. It's kind of accelerated my kind of clinical academic journey. So happy to talk offline at any point.
And just to mention, so in terms, as I said, Tom, these sort of fellowships, they are quite competitive. So let's say you want to build your CV a bit more. There are other opportunities. For example, you can be a PI for a randomized controlled trial, or there's a associate PI scheme, which you can also get involved and start learning about being a PI in the NHS hospital that you work, and that helps you to look at how you have been working to start building your CV in research, and then looking at applying for a PCAF in the future, for example.
And Tom, you're not too long into the journey as a physio. I was 13 years in, and I thought, yeah, I need something else, something more. And I went and did the graduate tutor scheme at Teesside. So the PhD was part of that, but I was also teaching as part of that role. Not a huge amount. It wasn't onerous. My research time was very much protected, such that I was still able to do clinical work. It's not as lucrative as some posts. I think my starting salary was, I don't know, probably that of a junior physio. but I was just so glad to be in research. So yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, I've managed to get in doing once a year I do a guest lecture at Teesside Uni to the second year students in the last couple of years, which has been great. Really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's really interesting, and thanks very much. I think it was David. Yeah, I've definitely looked at applying for that the internship scheme. Hopefully, try and do that for next year with a view to doing the fellowship with the NIHR potentially. But that's if I was successful applying.
And Tom, we are here if you want us to look anything over for you. David is obviously experienced. David, we're pulling you in now for your expertise. But yeah, if there's anything we can help with, just shout, even if it's just talking ideas through.
Thanks very much. You've all been great.
Okay.
Thanks a million.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much,
See you,
everybody.
have a good one.
Andy, will you stay on for me, please? Thank
Of course,
you.
yeah.
Bye.
Bruno.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Take care.
That's
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
All right.